Good evening. First, let me answer this. Will you explain the meaning of the words of the Master when he said, "For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works"? Here we have reference to the Christ. And I mentioned earlier in the week that actually the use of words like angels is not as fanciful as it seems. There are angels, even though these angels do not fly around in the air with wings looking like little cupids. But there are angels. There are, let me illustrate one marvelous instance of it. When Lindbergh flew the Atlantic on that memorable first trip to Paris, it took him about 36 hours to make that flight. And he had been up all night the night before on false starts and getting ready and getting back for a little sleep. And so actually he started out tired, and then he had 36 hours of flight before him. Now this is the story that he actually tells in his own book, that many times during that night he fell asleep. And the 2 nights, lost control of his machine, just let it run by itself. And when he awakened, he didn't know where he was, how far off he had slipped, or where it was necessary to get back. But that he became aware of a man in the back of his plane dressed as an aviator. And each time that he awakened out of his sleep, this man told him how much adjustment to make on his machines to get back on the beam again. Now, when he left New York, he expected that he would land in Europe, but somewhere within a range of 500 miles. In other words, it could be anywhere from the tip-top of Ireland down or into Spain. And that's as close as he could figure, that it would come somewhere within a range of 500 miles of his goal. And do you know where he landed? 50 miles from his goal. 50 miles from his goal without knowing where he was flying. Now, in our language, we would say that angels watched over him and protected him. Actually, in everyday language, it would probably better be said that he had higher guidance, probably from his own higher self, that which we call the God of us, or the Christ of us, the Son of God of us, the spiritual entity of us. Now, of course, you know as well as I do of the thousands of cases reported in the war of aviators and men at sea who had divine intervention in their individual affairs, and who, when there was no human way of safety, were brought to safety. And all of this indicates just what we have said from the beginning of this class. There is a spirit in man. There is a Christ. There is, from the beginning of time, as the Master told us, before Abraham was, I am with you. In other words, since long before time began, you and I have had an individual spiritual entity that overshadows us almost as if it were a cloud here behind us, or it might be a presence within us, because no matter how we visualize it, that's just imagination. We don't actually know what it is. He saw it as probably the spirit of a departed fellow aviator as being with him. Others have seen it in different ways. Now, whatever it is a presence, it is a power, it is a guide, it is a guardian angel, it is any name that you would like to give it, but as a matter of fact, it is the Christ or Son of God, which is and always has been a part of your being and mine, and is the part of every individual on the face of the globe, only that we have not been taught to turn to it. We have been taught to use our human reasoning powers, as if you could ever reason out anything more than you humanly know. And we have limited ourselves to our own knowledge, just as with muscles we've limited ourselves to our own physical strength, our own capacities, not realizing that each one of us has an unlimited mental and physical capacity. There is no limit to our capacity except the limitation that we place by looking on our education, environment, or personal experience as all that we have to help us, or as depending on our developed muscles for our strength. Whereas, when we learn to look to the invisible, that is when we begin to draw on resources that the world knows not of. Now, this is the meaning of the Master's teaching. I have meat ye know not of. If you were to ask me, I could give you waters, living waters, waters that spring up into life eternal. And if you drink the waters that I give you, you'll never thirst again. If you eat the meat I give you, you'll never hunger again. Now the Master says Moses fed the Hebrews, but they hungered again and they died. But if you eat the meat that I give you, you'll never hunger and you'll never die. Now all he meant by that is this, that if you will stop placing your full faith and confidence in that which is external, that which has form, which Paul called the creature, if you will not put your full faith in the creature, in that which is created, in that which has form, and put your full faith in the invisible, in that which you have never seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled, when you learn to do that, you will have the difference between sowing to the flesh and reaping corruption, and sowing to the Spirit and reaping life everlasting. Now, there is nothing wrong, remember, with creation or the creature. There is nothing wrong with good food and a good home and abundant money. There's nothing wrong with that. The wrongness is putting our faith in it. That's the wrongness. Enjoying it and using it is fine. But putting our faith in it is where the error comes in. In other words, if Mr. Lindbergh had been depending on his ability to stay awake, or on his ability to find his way to Europe alone, he would have been at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, because he had no way to stay awake, and he had no way of keeping track of how much he was flying off beam when he was asleep. But you see, the mere fact that there was an invisible something that could supply his need saved him. Admiral Byrd tells a similar experience in his story of his trip. It was that trip to the South Pole when he went to the point furthest out, which was about 200 miles away from his fellow voyagers, and he was supposed to stay out there 6 months alone at this station for some particular investigation. Now, only about 3 months passed, and 2 accidents befell him. One, his machinery went out of order for keeping fresh air in his living quarters. And the second one, he broke a bone. I've forgotten whether it was his arm or his leg, but he broke a bone, I think, in his leg. And he was faced with a dilemma, the possibility of staying there and dying with this bad air and his physical condition, or sending for his men, breaking the experiment, and perhaps forever losing the opportunity to get what he had gone there for. Well, it was only a few weeks before that, on the way coming down to the Antarctic, that he read that God is mind. And this is the first time that that idea had ever been presented to him, that God is mind. And it intrigued him. And he thought a good deal about it. But when this accident happened, then came another story. I wonder if it's true. Because if God is mind, then God is omnipresent, because my mind is omnipresent. And if I have God here, I can trust this situation to God, both with the air and with the broken bone. And he tells the story that he went to bed relying on what he had read, that God is mind, and since his mind was where he was, God was where he was, and he woke up and his leg was healed. And he was able to stay the full 6 months and perform his work and make all the necessary adjustments for his air and so forth. Now, whether you call it mind, remember, he didn't mean mind a reasoning process, because he didn't do any reasoning. When he realized God was mind, he was willing to accept the fact that God is the all-knowing mind that doesn't have to be told anything. So he just went to bed and allowed himself to rest in that mind. And he found that for him, it worked. Now, it makes no difference whether you say God is mind, or whether you say it's God, or whether you say it's Christ, or whether you say that Lindbergh had an angel with him. It makes no difference what terminology you use. What counts is that you are acknowledging, first, that there is an infinite power of good where you are, and that this infinite power of good is at the same time a divine intelligence, a universal intelligence, an all-knowing mind. Now, yes, you could go the next step too and say that the nature of that mind would be love, since the Master says, it knoweth your need, and it is its good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Now, if you, even here and now, in this room, in this minute, make the acknowledgement, there is omnipresence. Call it mind, God, Christ, Spirit, anything you like. Law. But there is omnipresence where I am. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Make the acknowledgement of omnipresence, an infinite intelligence which is a divine love, which is where you are at this second, whether or not you are making your bed in some temporary hell, or whether you are in heaven, or whether you are walking in the valley of the shadow of death, acknowledge that where I am, this infinity is. That it is the all-knowing mind or intelligence of the universe, that which knew enough not only to create me, but this marvelous body along with me, without receiving any help from me or any instructions. This all-knowing mind is likewise divine love, and its function in my life is not only to create me, but to maintain me and sustain me until eternity. Now, as you relax in confidence, in quietness and in confidence, as you relax into that awareness, you will find that it will take you over like it took Lindbergh over, like it took Admiral Byrd over, like it took over many of the aviators on all sides in the war. You will find it will take you over, and it will begin to function the harmony of your body or your purse or your business or your home or any other activity in which you are engaged, in proportion as you can rest back in it, in proportion as you can have an inner feeling, yes, I cannot believe that there is a creative God that abandons its son or daughter at some particular stage or other for some stupid reason or other. I cannot any more accept a God that would abandon its creation than I can accept a human parent in its right mind abandoning its child. Now, God is the all-mind. God is the universal intelligence of this universe. And it behooves us to accept this truth, to understand this, and to rest back and rely on it, and then you will agree that you are sowing to the Spirit. You are now trusting, resting back in, realizing the infinite invisible. You are surrendering your human will, your human wisdom, your human desires, and you are literally saying, nevertheless, Father, not my will, but thine be done. Now, I admit this, that strange things may happen to you. In the Bible times, early Bible times, a man named Joseph got himself thrown into a pit and sold into slavery. And that was a terrible demonstration, we would say. But it had one advantage. It got him into Egypt, into the household of the king, as a slave, of course. But even in those days, he was able to work his way up from slavery to being a captain in the household. But then he had another bad piece of demonstration, we would say. He was accused of immorality and thrown into prison. And he was left for 2 years to rot in prison. Only he didn't rot. He kept up his communing with God. He kept up his meditation. He kept up his inner spiritual reliance on the infinite invisible. It took 2 years for that infinite invisible to walk him out of prison. But he was out only a very short time when he was the number 2 man in all Egypt, second only to the king, in command of all of the food and all the assets of Egypt. And he was able even to supply the very brothers who had gotten him into trouble. And it's a remarkable answer that he gave them when they discovered him and thought that he probably would try to avenge himself on them. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. It was not you that did this. You didn't do this to me. God sent me before you into Egypt. In other words, that I'd be at the right place at the right time when the right moment came. Now, some of those things are apt to happen to us. The very moment we begin this absolute, complete reliance on the mind of God, the will of God, and the love of God, we may find ourselves being moved in very strange ways, and some of them we may not like, not knowing what the ultimate destiny is to be. I have told a story, and you're probably going to hear it in some of the tapes, that before I came into this work, my business began to fall off horribly, so that I had to find a very good practitioner to get some treatments for supply. And you know what happened? My business got worse. And so I had to look for another practitioner. And to make a long story short, I found 5 practitioners, all highly recommended, and each one I went to, my business got worse until I had none left. And then it was that after being plagued by my friends and told to wake up, and why don't you really come to your senses and know that you're a practitioner, not a businessman anymore, that I really did go into practice. But by that time, I didn't have a dime to my name and had to borrow $150 to pay the first month's rent. That's how I came into this work. I come in on $250 of borrowed money. $125 went for rent, the other $125 for living expenses. Because my demonstration wasn't one of obeying the divine mind and believing that he had good things in store for me in a spiritual way. I had to see his hand made manifest in more orders. And he didn't believe me. And he paid no attention to 5 very good practitioners. I don't know how he could have done that to them. And so you see, and that wasn't the first discord, that wasn't the last of the discords in my life by any manner of means. Because the will of God does not operate according to the stupidity of man. And if anybody does believe that he's wise enough in telling God what his demonstration ought to be or when, that man has just proceeded higher than God. That's a nice place to be if you can get there. Now, let us agree on this, because this is the most important step that can ever come into your life. When you begin to believe in angels, whether you begin to believe in them by that name or some other, begin to believe that there is a divine presence in you or with you or through you or around you. Begin to believe that there is a spiritual destiny that was meant for you since the beginning of time. That when you evolved in the mind of God, your destiny was included right there with you. And it's been there awaiting us all this time, except that we've been too busy trying to tell God to give us better business when God didn't want us to have that particular kind of business. Or we were busy telling God what city our demonstration should be in or what nation it should be in, and God knows nothing about cities or national barriers. And he's just as apt to send us out into this world of foreign countries as domestic countries. When you begin to believe in a spiritual destiny, when you begin to accept the fact that there is an infinite intelligence which is a divine love, which neither gives nor withholds, but is always functioning and requires only our tuning in, once you begin that, you will find that your life's path will begin to smoothen out or get rough, but it makes no difference as long as you can remember Joseph, and remember that, or not only Joseph, but Elijah out in the woods having to depend on cakes being baked on coals, on stones. having ravens bring food to him, a poor widow sharing with him. Or Jesus up in the wilderness battling lack and limitation and acknowledging it. Or Jesus in Gethsemane saying that this is bad medicine you're giving me, but if it's your will, I can take it. So just remember this, that we may have some thorns along with our roses. We may have some very difficult experiences, but they're all part of the adjustment from living our life the way we want it to bringing it into God's government the way God originally wanted it and now is going to establish it now that we've given up telling God what we want. Now, you may ask this: how do I know whether God is leading me? And all I can say is that sometimes you won't know it. Sometimes you'll just have to do it along on faith, and if it goes wrong, just wait for the adjustment that'll put you back on the right track. You may even make mistakes, but you've got to learn not to be afraid of mistakes. Remember, the only man who makes no mistakes is the man who never accomplishes anything. He hasn't got courage to do something, and therefore he doesn't make any mistakes. Don't be afraid of mistakes. Heaven knows there isn't anybody ever lived that didn't make them. Everybody's had to make mistakes because we can't all be so completely attuned as to see the will of God in the way it's being revealed to us. And so we may have to go the way of Joseph in a pit. We may have to go the way of Joseph in a prison. Paul got himself into prison. Peter got himself into prison. Never forget that the way is not always the sweet and light fantastic as some people imagine it to be. It would be, and I will tell you this, it is all light and love the minute you are so attuned to God's government that you never again interpose your own will or wish or desire upon God or your advice. Now, once you have come to that place where Paul says die daily. When yourself has died, when you no longer are trying to assert your will or get your way or have God do your bidding, when you've given that all up and come into actual attunement with God, after that then, there are no mistakes, and there are very few, if any, great difficulties. Any difficulties that come up are minor ones and are quickly adjusted. But I have had the experience myself, I can tell you, of sitting in Hawaii and having the still small voice say to me, go to London, when I had no more business to be going to London than you have at this minute. None. I could see no reason for going to London. I didn't know anybody there. I had no business there. I had no students there. Probably I knew of a dozen people who were reading The Infinite Way and had written me, but they hadn't asked me to come to London. And here the voice says to me, go to London early in December. And I want you to know that I went to New York to get ready for London, got my passport, and on the 3rd or 4th or 5th of December, the voice said, go tomorrow, and I flew tomorrow. But when I arrived in London, I didn't know what to do, because I had no business there. All I could do was go to a hotel, get a suite of rooms, and sit down and say, well, Father, you got me here, but why, I don't know. Now, what am I to do? And I just sat there waiting. And all of a sudden, the thought came to me, as I know now from that same source, well, you know a dozen people who are reading The Infinite Way. Why not send them a card and let them know you're here? They might like to talk to you. They can call you on the phone or visit you. Well, that's a good idea. I'll do that. I'll go downstairs and get some postal cards. And I did. And then again the voice said, well, you have a chum over in Germany you haven't seen in many years. Why don't you let him know you're here and you're going to visit him before you go home? Good, I'm going to do that. And I did that. And then, well, now you've been wanting to meet Mr. Hamblin. That's right, I want to meet Mr. Hamblin. Well, I'll write him a letter. I couldn't find his telephone number, so I wrote him a letter. Told him I'm in London and I'd love to meet him. I'd never met him. When I did those things, I was through. I had nothing more to do but sit there in a room. And 2 days later, word came from Mr. Hamblin that I could come down and visit him the next day, and I did. And the day that I went down to visit him, there was a letter forwarded to me from home from Sweden, telling me that there were a group of 12 ladies up in Stockholm who were reading The Infinite Way. And if I was still practicing, that some of them would like some help. And then they casually mentioned that they had received The Infinite Way from a Christian Science practitioner in London. Well, that's the first time I'd ever heard about this. So when I went down to Mr. Hamblin, I said, do you know anything about a Christian Science practitioner in London who sends out copies of The Infinite Way? Oh, yes, there's a lady there who buys them 50 at a time. Well, now, who would that be? And he told me her name. When I went back to London, I visited that lady. Oh, she was so happy to see me. Not only happy to see me, but you want to know why she couldn't get the rest of the writings as well as The Infinite Way. Well, it's a matter of exchange. We can't send them here. I'll be glad to send them as gifts. No, we don't want them as gifts. We can afford to pay for them. But you must arrange to get them here. Well, how? How? I don't know how. Well, why don't you go down and meet Mr. Nagel of Ellen Fowler? He's a very nice young man, and maybe he can do something about it. Well, I'll do that. And I did, and before I got through, not only Mr. Nagel had taken over the sale of all the Infinite Way books in England, but he asked me if I wouldn't let him publish a book. He's now publishing 7 Infinite Way books. Now, I mean, all of this, remember, without knowing why I came to England, without having any business to. And you know the answer, don't you, that right now there are about 8 or 10 of the books being published in England, and they have accepted all the rest of my writings for publication. That's kind of a miracle, isn't it? An American coming over and them accepting nearly 20 books will be published in England. Now, I didn't know anything about it, but God did, you'll admit that. And out of that has come all of the work in England. From there I was sent over to Holland. From there I was sent to Sweden. From there a Dutch publisher wanted to translate it into Dutch. A German publisher wanted to translate it into German. Do you see all that happened back in Hawaii with the voice saying, go to London? See that? In the same way with an invitation coming from Mr. Van Buren, come to South Africa. Now, don't you think it's foolish to come to South Africa when you only have 20 people there that are reading the books? And then you get there and find 200. And then in a short time, it's 800. Isn't that a miracle? But that can only come from obeying that voice. But what I want to ask you is this. If there weren't such a voice, and if there weren't such a presence, would all the rest of this story be true? No, and you know it. Everybody that can testify, like Christian Science or Unity, any one of those people, Mrs. Eddy or Mrs. Fillmore, could testify to the fact that only a God could have spread their movement around the world the way it has spread around the world. They couldn't have done it. Well, Mrs. Eddy never left her little shack up in Massachusetts. Mrs. Fillmore never left her home out in Kansas. And yet their work is spread all over the world. You mean to tell me if there weren't a God behind those women, or in them, or through them, or something, that all of this could take place? Well, you know it as well as I do. The thing is this. Is there a God for Jesus and Joseph, or for Mrs. Eddy, or Mrs. Fillmore, or Joe Goldsmith? Or is there a universal God for every single blessed one of us who learns how to turn to the kingdom of God within and make contact. Now, it isn't easy. I admit that. It isn't easy. None of us on this path can testify to a wide and straight path. It's a narrow and straight path, a very narrow and straight one, and you've got to listen for that voice mighty carefully at times in order to hear it. You have to live very, very much with your heart and soul and mind stayed on God in order to make that attunement, because you won't connect with God in your spare time, I'll tell you that. It's a full-time job. It's one of devotion. It's why the Master said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind." God is a jealous God. There's no room for anything less than your whole heart and soul, because of the generations of separation that have existed between us and God, and we now are breaking down that middle wall of partition that has been in existence through countless generations behind us. But the first step is, do you believe in angels? Do you believe there is an angel presence within you, around you? Do you believe that God has given to you His Son, one Christ, His own image and likeness, to be your particular guiding star, your guardian angel? Do you believe that God has turned you loose on earth, but not turned you loose without His own protection, without His own care? And if you have been living as a human being separate and apart from God, now is the time to turn over a new leaf and declare, "I am one of God's household, and as such, the kingdom of God is within me. There is something established within me that is meant to protect me and care for me and guide me, and it's called the still small voice, or it's called the Christ, or it's called an angel." Did not Jesus say, "I can call unto me legions of angels that would take me out of this trouble if my demonstration called for my being taken out of this trouble"? Yes, He believed in angels, in legions of angels, and I'm sure He didn't any more mean these flying kind than we mean. Maybe they're going to give us flying saucers instead of angels now with divine messages. But call them by what name you will, this you must become convinced of. There is a spiritual entity called Christ, or the Son of God, which is your and my true identity. And it is where you are, and it is where I am. The place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Son, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. I will be with thee unto the end of the world. And as you learn to trust that presence, relax in it, give it credit. If it could make a tree, it can make your whole life's demonstration. Only God, the poet tells us, could make a tree, and only God could make a human body. Only God could form this universe. Only God could set out a system like the stars and the sun and the moon and the tides and the rain, all working in cooperation together to keep us fed. Fish in the sea, birds in the air, cattle on 1,000 hills, oil in the ground, and gold and diamonds and platinum and plutonium and all the rest of these things that man needed in the past, needs now, and other things he has not yet discovered that he's going to need 1,000 years from now. Why, we are promised that the day is going to come when we are all going to be fed from minerals and things that are in the sea, without ever having to do any more farming. Why not? The land is going to be needed to live on. It isn't going to be able to be used for farming, and so we're going to draw sustenance out of the sea. All right, what difference it make whether we draw it out of the sea or out of the air? It's coming to us because it's provided that throughout eternity our needs shall be met by a higher power than the human mind could ever dream of or ever plan or ever think. Now, I suppose you have read magazine articles. I had one that I took a great deal of joy in reading to one of our classes, written in a magazine in the year 1900. And this was a tragic article because it told us in the United States that dark days were ahead of us. Horses were dying out faster than they were being reborn, and soon there wouldn't be any horses left to carry us and our carriages. Now, isn't that a tragedy? Horses were going to become extinct. Yes, they became extinct, didn't they? Not a bit of tragedy. We now have 210 horses under every hood. Yes, always there are dire predictions of the end of potatoes or the end of horses or the end of something else, but always that which knows our need before we do plans for the extinction of horses and has already prepared the way for the automobile by discovering oil out in Pennsylvania. Do you see that? There is a wisdom. What did the poet say about a divinity that shapes our ends? There isn't any question about that. There is a divine intelligence of this universe, and it is planning ahead into the 1,000-mile-an-hour airplane age, and it is bringing with it everything necessary for our good. I had another magazine article published on the occasion of the first railroad train that ran from New York to Philadelphia, written by a doctor who said that if this nonsense doesn't stop, we'll all be wiped out because no man can travel over 22 miles an hour and live. Ah, yes, he figured without a God. He figured without a God. He figured only to the extent of the human intellect that he had developed, but that there were far greater things than the human mind has ever discovered that he hadn't discovered. Now, we're in a different age, and we're in a different generation. And not only that, but we in this room are a peculiar people. Probably I couldn't say this out on the street corner, but I can say it here. That there is a divine intelligence whose nature is love that is capable of leading us into greater harmonies, individually and collectively, nationally and internationally, than this world has ever dreamed about. Now, probably everyone in this room has witnessed all that I'm saying in some measure or other, because if you have ever experienced a spiritual healing, you already know that there are powers beyond anything that we can account for. I have never yet heard of anyone on earth who knew how a spiritual healing takes place. I certainly don't know anything about it, and I have not only had the pleasure of knowing many wonderful practitioners, wonderful healers, but I have had the joy of teaching many. But I have never yet discovered one that knew how a spiritual healing takes place. And so it is that there must be something operating beyond the range of our human knowledge, which through our inner perception we contact, and which brings its laws and its grace into our experience, superseding the laws of matter that make us ill or keep us in confinement of one nature or another, or limitation of one nature or another. Now we come to probably the deepest subject of our week's work. Please be good enough to tell us why it is often so difficult to get into the silence a few of us will be so glad to learn more about it all as we realize it is real. When one is more advanced, is it easier? Yes. When one is more advanced, it is easier, and I can tell you this, that you don't have to wait very long to be more advanced. It is not as difficult as it seems, this matter of getting into the silence. First of all, let me tell you this. When you close your eyes, those of you who are having this uncomfortable experience, you will find extraneous thoughts entering your mind, unwanted thoughts. These thoughts may be of any nature. They may be fear thoughts. They may be sensual thoughts. They may be downright immoral ones. I know from lots of experience that there's no way of knowing what kind of thoughts are going to come into your mind once you close your eyes to shut them out. And the reason is this. They aren't your thoughts. Now, will you remember that? They aren't your thoughts. You may never consciously have a sensual or an immoral thought, but you're apt to get one when you start this meditation work. And the reason is, it isn't your thought at all that's coming in. It is just what we call mortal thought. Now, you may have fear thoughts come in. You may have thoughts that make your body uncomfortable, make it impossible to sit still. These are not your thoughts. These are mortal thoughts. It is almost as if we were an antenna receiving the world's thoughts, and in a sense that's true. That is why in the early days when they taught that thought is power, that is where they got this impression from. Because thoughts which are neither your thoughts nor mine do come in and influence us adversely. It makes some very nice people very bad people. It makes some very normally confident people very fearful people. And it isn't their fault. These are not the person's own thoughts coming in. They are what is called mortal thought. That is why I was led to the discovery that resulted in the infinite way. I had heard and read all about these teachings that tell you that if you have rheumatism, it's probably because you're resentful, or if you have piles, it's probably because you have deep-seated resentment, and if you have cancer, it's probably because you're jealous or envious, and you know all the lists of different things. Well, there isn't a word of truth in them, and but not a word. Nobody's been ever able to prove one of those statements. I can tell you how they came into existence in the first place and how they spread, not only through the metaphysical field, but out into psychosomatic medicine. The lists originally began with Mrs. Eddy. Mrs. Eddy was the first person on the face of the earth that compiled a list that showed where you got your diseases from, what states of thought caused them. And she compiled a list showing that rheumatism came from resentment, and cancer came from jealousy, and consumption came from sensuality. Oh, there's a list that big, and some of it you'll still find in Mr. Kimball's books. But Mrs. Eddy was practicing maybe 5, 6, 7 years when she discovered she was all wrong, that there wasn't a word of truth in that thing. But by that time it had spread not only among her students, but among the now beginning New Thought and Unity students. They carried all those lists with them into Unity and into New Thought. And they all thought they were gospel truth, and they adopted them. And now psychosomatic medicine has adopted the very lists. And I can tell you there is not a word of truth in them. Your diseases do not come from your wrong thinking. Your diseases come from a universal miasma, a universal belief, a universal wrong thinking, if you will, but not yours. There are too blame many sweet, fine, refined, good, pure women who have got cancer and consumption to turn around and blame them for their diseases. There are too many fine, upstanding men in the world suffering from all kinds of cancers and thrombosis and all the rest of this that never thought enough evil thought to bring that kind of horrors on themselves. And don't you ever believe that humanity at large is that bad that it could bring these diseases on themselves, because they aren't. Humanity is swell people. There are some bad ones in the world, there's no doubt about that, but they're the few. The vast majority of men and women on the face of the earth are decent, good people, with human failings, sure. But if any God or any devil would inflict them with these horrible diseases for the very petty little harm that they do in the world, or petty little sins they commit, then this world is a better place to get out of than to stay into. And don't you ever believe for one single minute that men and women on this earth are bad enough or think badly enough to bring these horrors on themselves. As a matter of fact, the devils on earth, the Stalins, the Hitlers, the Mussolinis, the Roosevelts, those devils get by without these diseases. And nobody yet in the metaphysical world has been able to account for why. They put the world in slavery. They wreck the governments. They wreck the finances. They wreck the morals of people. And they go singing through life with gold medals all over them. I'd like some of these metaphysical teachers to tell me why. When all of these nice, sweet people are sitting around suffering cancers and tuberculosis and paralysis, and all the innocent children that are suffering from polio. And you tell me wrong thinking does it? Don't you ever believe it. It's wrong thinking, yes, but not yours. It's the combined mortal, sinful thought of the world that fastens itself onto us individually, and that I discovered in 1933. And I began to prove immediately that not a person could come into my office and stay sick. Why? Because I didn't bother trying to heal them or correct them or tell them that they ought to be more generous or more loving or more something or other. I said to them, listen, you are not suffering from your sins. This is an impersonal error which is merely fastening itself onto you. Now wake up and choose ye this day whom you will serve, mortal thought or God's thought. Are you going to be a victim of everybody's thinking out here in the world or all this universal belief, or are you going to take your own self in your own hand and say, God, I give you my mind. My mind is subject to you. My thoughts come from God, not from man. God's thoughts are not man's thoughts, and I'm subject only to God's thoughts. I am the spiritual Son of God. And I took every soul that came in my office and said, look here, denounce this teaching that your wrong thinking is responsible for this. It isn't your wrong thinking. You've accepted world's wrong thinking. And all you have to do is watch my record for 16 years as a healer and 10 years in this work to know that I'm proving every single day of the week that it isn't your wrong thinking. It is your belief, your acceptance of the belief that this universal wrong thinking can be a creator unto you. And I say to you right now that you've got to learn to be master of your own fate, captain of your own ship, and of your own soul. And you've got to do it by declaring, I surrender to God, not to wrong thinking or to right thinking. I surrender to God. I give God my mind and body and soul to work through. And then you'll find that these thoughts will not keep coming in. They're not your thoughts. You've just been an antenna for all the world's rotten thinking and not knowing how to defend yourself. I'll tell you how to defend yourself. Lump it all up into universal thought or universal belief or universal consciousness, and then say, you have nothing in me. Satan cometh and findeth nothing in me on which to hang his hat. I am an instrument for God, an inlet and an outlet for God. The ways of God are my ways. The will of God is my will. The life of God is my life. The love of God is my love. And I hold no man in bondage, even to his wrong belief, knowing that he's not responsible for him. It's a whole universal mental miasma, and it would inflict itself on all of us unless we individually and specifically turn on it and say, that's enough. That's about enough. God's thoughts are my thoughts. God's thoughts will have outlet in me and through me. Take hold of yourself. Don't let these stupid universal things fly around in the air and take lodgment in you. They don't belong in you. They don't belong in anybody else either, for that matter. But they're going to keep on inflicting those who are ignorant of what's handling them. Now, there's only one thing handling us, and that's universal belief. Even if you are envious, even if you are jealous, even if you are malicious, how'd you get that way? It isn't your nature. You never wanted to be that way. It's inflicted on you from this universal sense. So don't blame anybody who is envious, jealous, malicious. Don't blame anybody who is sensual. If they come to you for help them out of it by showing them that they need not be victims of universal belief. But the way to do it is, first of all, to recognize why these thoughts are not my thoughts. I'm not the kind of person that wants to think vain thoughts, greedy thoughts, lustful thoughts, envious thoughts. That's not my nature. I'm told that my very body is the temple of the living God. I am the temple of the living God. Ye are children of God, if so be the Spirit of God dwell in you. But if you're going to let the spirit of the earth dwell in you, you're just handing yourself over to the devil to be used. Now, when you meditate, let these thoughts go in and out. Ignore them. Don't stop them. Don't try to stop them, because you can't succeed. You can't stop thought with willpower. It's been tried, and it won't work. There is only one way to get still. Get still and sort of stand back here, way in back of the front of your mind. And then if thoughts want to go back and forth, let them. And you sit back there and watch them. Just watch them. Say, I'm glad now I know they're not my thoughts, so no matter how bad they are, they don't belong to me. Just go ahead and volley back and forth until you starve to death for lack of any me to support you. And you see, it is we who have been supporting those thoughts. We've been giving them the word I to live on. Now take that word I back here. And when you meditate, get back here and look up here to the front of your mind. And if thoughts want to go through, let them. Say, now I'm wise to you. You're not my thoughts, therefore you can do nothing to me. You have no substance, and I'm not going to support you. So go ahead, have a good time. Walk in and out, up and down. And pretty soon you find you'll starve them to death, and they won't come back. Then you'll find that you're getting inside into an inner stillness. And you'll find another thing, too. You won't have nearly as many negative human emotions as you formerly had. You won't have nearly as many fears or doubts. You don't know how much fear you really experience in a lifetime. And you don't know that those fears aren't yours. Those are the world's fears. I know that practitioners who are very sensitive have had this experience. Sometimes they've wakened up out of a sleep with a fear as if the whole world was coming to an end. Well, you know, if they really are advanced, they quickly have realized, hey, the world's trying to break in on me. This isn't my thought. I'm not afraid of anything. I have God. This is the world thought breaking in. And in that way, they break it. That very thing happened to us in the city of Seattle. You will notice it if you open your little copy of The Deep Silence of My Peace. I'll tell you what happened and how that book came to be born. I was walking from the hotel to the Seattle Truth Center to give this class. And on the way, I was conscious of the newsboys screaming extras on the street. And I couldn't help paying attention to it, looking over. And there were 4 headlines. Number 1, we had just lost a big battle in Korea. Number 2, at 12 o'clock midnight tonight, the whole continental telephone system was going on strike. Number 3, at 12 o'clock noon tomorrow, the whole continental railroad system of the United States is going on strike. And there was a number 4, which I have forgotten. With those other 3, I guess the 4th wasn't important. Well, when I went into the center and I went up on the platform, there was an air in that place as if the air were black and thick. You could cut it. And I started by saying, oh, the world's fears have gotten into this room on us. And I think you'll find that in the very first paragraph of that deep silence. Because I all of a sudden became aware of a blackness, a denseness, a deep fear in that room. And I made that remark. And then a divine grace came to our rescue, and the Spirit jumped right into me. And it pushed me aside, and all the rest of that deep silence came out. That whole thing just poured out as I stood there on the platform with, of course, the recorder going, fortunately. And so all we had to do was deep silence.